In Rajasthan, India, the government has issued a mandate that sounds like a passage from a Gothic novel. No one is permitted to enter the ruins of Bhangarh Fort between sunset and sunrise, a rule enforced not by local custom but by federal law. This is the site that many consider the most haunted location in the country. To the authorities, it is a protected monument. To those who live nearby, it is the epicenter of phenomena that the modern world is not equipped to explain. Aryan, Rohit, Samar, and Karan viewed these warnings as a challenge. Armed with flashlights and the casual confidence of people who grew up on the internet, they arrived at the fort with one goal: to prove that the legends were nothing more than stories told to keep tourists away. Behind them lay the paved roads and cell service of the modern world. Ahead sat a silent stone boundary that had remained undisturbed for centuries, waiting for the sun to drop. As the orange light of the sunset faded, the group bypassed the official gate and slipped inside through a collapsed section of the rear wall. The change was immediate. The evening wind stopped, and the air turned unnaturally still. The silence was so absolute that the mechanical click of their flashlights sounded like a gunshot in the empty courtyard. By stepping past that broken wall, they had left the world of rational laws. They were now operating in a space where their presence was clearly not invited. The fort's interior is a maze of hollowed-out stone hovels and staircases that lead into pitch-black chambers. It feels less like a ruin and more like a city that simply stopped breathing. Then came the first sound. From somewhere deep within the stone corridors, a woman's laugh drifted through the air, slow, distant, and perfectly clear. They scanned the ruins with their lights, but the stone was empty. By 10 p.m., they had reached the center of an old haveli. In here, the darkness was so dense that their flashlights barely seemed to penetrate the corners of the room. Karan panned his light toward the back wall and froze. A tall, black shadow was standing in the corner. Not a silhouette cast by their lights, but a solid, unmoving presence that didn't seem to be breathing. Aryan called out, but there was no answer. When they stepped closer and shined their beams directly on it, the shadow simply ceased to exist, leaving only the bare stone wall. The flashlights shook in their hands. The rational explanations they had brought with them were failing, replaced by the sudden, cold realization that they were no longer alone in the mansion. The environment became aggressive. A sudden wind tore through the ruins, carrying a cacophony of whispers, dozens of voices speaking at once, their words just out of reach of understanding. In the middle of the noise, every light they carried, the flashlights, the phone screens, went dead simultaneously. A sudden bolt of lightning cracked across the sky, flooding the courtyard with a white glare. Standing in the center of the stones was a woman in a white sari. Her face was a blackened void, and her eyes were fixed on them with a terrifying, unblinking focus. They turned and ran for the gate, but the geometry of the fort seemed to shift. No matter which corridor they took or how fast they sprinted, they found themselves staring back at the same courtyard they had just left. Samar tripped and hit the ground. When the others tried to haul him up, he didn't move. He just stared into the empty space behind them, his face drained of color, whispering that something they couldn't see was standing directly over him. The fort had become a trap. It was no longer a simple collection of ruins. It was a structure actively preventing their escape. At 2 a.m., they sought refuge in an old stone temple, hoping the sanctity of the space would provide a barrier against whatever hunted them. But the temple offered no safety. As they huddled together, the heavy bell at the entrance began to ring on its own, slow, rhythmic tolls that echoed through the hollow chamber. A woman's voice, clear and cold, filled the room. It gave them a single, chilling warning. This place is not for the living. The air turned freezing, and their breath came out in thick clouds. Along the heavily textured walls, dark, faceless shapes began to stretch and crawl, surrounding them in the dark. Even here, in a place built for peace, the group realized that the rules of the living had no authority. The moment the first sliver of dawn touched the temple door, the atmosphere snapped back to normal. The whispers stopped. The bells went silent. In the daylight, Bhangarh Fort looks like any other historical site. It is a picturesque collection of ruins that gives no hint of the violence of the night before. This is the fort's greatest deception. It waits for the light to disappear before it reveals its true nature. The friends escaped the grounds, but the experience left a mark. Samar, who had been the most vocal skeptic, was the most changed. He spent the walk to the car in a catatonic silence, his eyes fixed on nothing, as if he were still staring at the entity in the courtyard. Years later, whenever the subject of that night comes up, Samar has little to say. He simply warns people that some doors are locked for a reason, and it is a mistake to think you are strong enough to open them. Bhangarh Fort remains a living monument to the unknown. It serves as a stark reminder that human curiosity has a limit, and that some places are more than willing to show you where that limit is.